It's my honor to introduce Jack Balkin, who is a professor of law at Yale Law School and an expert in First Amendment law and internet law. Ben Smith, from the founder and editor of Buzzfeed, and Josh Marshall, co-founder and editor of Buzzfeed. Sorry, look there.
Not founder, just editor.
Okay, and Josh Marshall, this I know is definitely true, founder, publisher, and editor of Talking Points Memo.
Guys, I want to direct this conversation mostly about your role as members of the press and how platforms, their content moderation, their advertising networks, everything they do makes it easier or less easy for you to act as members of the press. So I'm just going to start by asking you to tell me a story, any story that tells me something about how it shapes your duties as a member of the press, as the institution of the press.
I mean, I think I don't want to tell one story as emblematic because it goes, wildly in both directions.
You don't have to tell a story, just tell me what you think.
And I mean, I think, BuzzFeed in particular is a news organization that grew on the platforms. We grew sort of with Facebook and Twitter and Pinterest and exist because we rode that wave of growth and are kind of deeply interwoven to and attached to them. And I think in some ways probably have more sympathy for them than a lot of our peers who were really badly damaged in that same moment. But
so your view, so to start out, you're amplified. You're given a platform.
Oh yeah, I mean, speaking yes, and right. I mean, we sort of our existence, and I think the existence of a sort of anybody who any media outlet that exists, that came into existence in the last 10 years, that's because they rode that wave of growth around Facebook and Twitter. And I think for a lot of us now are trying, and I think the ones that are successful then are able to sort of stand to some degree on their own.
Right. And is there any way in which it shapes or structures your obligations as the institutional press? I hate to use the word institutional. It's just not the right word anymore.
I mean, I think I don't know. I'm not sure about my obligations as the institutional press, but certainly, I mean, I think we think of a story as something that is going to spread on one of these platforms and think all the time about why it would spread and why people were, and again, these things, it's not a technical challenge.
Right.
It's why will human beings share things with each other?
Well, but the question is, have you ever had a story that got moderated away or got demoted or that basically didn't spread because you were in violation of a moderation policy?
That rarely happens. I think if you've passed some perceived bar as being part of the legitimate press, the platforms are in many ways terrified of you. And much of what passes for moderations on platforms now is my reporters or Josh's reporters or another reporter reporting on something, some outrageous thing somebody's done on a platform, the platform panicking, pushing that complaint in front of everybody else's complaints on Jarrell's table. And so I think we actually, vis-a-vis the platforms, are in some ways much more volunteer moderator than we are moderatee.
Right. That is to say, you understand yourself as reporting on misbehavior by the very platforms that are the source of your economic life.
Right, and we police them to some degree.
Right. And does that create any conflicts of interest in either direction?
I mean, I would say, and adding to the question of conflicts of interest, they also increasingly act as traditional television networks, essentially,
right.
Either commissioning or working in partnership on content. So we have a show on Facebook, we have a show on Twitter, in which we have, really material business arrangements with them. So it's really complicated. I think when people from the platforms, to be fair, really, somewhat to my surprise, have never had anyone from the platforms use that as leverage.
Right.
But in theory they could. Sometimes people do sort of raise it and complain, and I think what I always say is it's sort of like when the Obama administration would criticize Israel, and the Israelis would say, I mean, why are you criticizing us about human rights? Look at what they're doing in Egypt. And the Obama administration would say, well, you're the only democracy in the region.
Right. So
we hold you to a higher standard.
So I just want to point out, not to make you the example, but you are an example of a news site that you would say is sufficiently mainstream, sufficiently legitimate, sufficiently trusted, that your relationship with the platforms is going to be relatively comfortable. There are problems you have, but you're not in a position, you're not InfoWars, right?
Yeah.
Are there any sites that you know of that are a little closer to the edge and therefore run into more trouble?
I think that the platforms try to, to a fault, go pretty far out to the edge before they moderate something that's calling itself news. But I don't know. I think if you look at the latest Facebook purges of what they called fake news, there were some. We ran an op-ed by a guy who runs a left-wing site that is definitely not going to win any Pulitzers, and not doing any reporting and is basically repackaging and wildly overhyping stuff, but probably not story by story beyond the pale.
Right.
That they decided to ban and demonetize. I'm also not sure it's a huge loss to the world that they did.
There you are. So Josh, your story is a little different because we were just talking about the fact that we met at a conference on blogging back in the early aughts, early 2000s. So you started out before there were social media, and you were basically trying to make a living as a publisher and a journalist long before that. So you actually had to adapt to each stage of the transformation of the industry. Mm-hmm. So can you tell me a story, or rather just give me an account of what you think, how the current content moderation system benefits you or hinders you?
It's funny to have. This hadn't really occurred to me before we started talking, but having Ben and I here, they're really it's almost like the polar opposites, or not opposites, but kind of on opposite ends of the spectrum, in terms of the role of platforms in the sort of not just the growth, but the current state of
DNA of
yeah, exactly, it's funny that, as you said, we existed long before at least social media as part of the news environment was a thing, and partly intentionally, partly because partly for lack of resources, and partly for the lack of, fundamentally we're an editorial organization. And so for a lot of different reasons, we never really worked that hard to become players on the platforms.
Now, can you just stop and explain why that is? Because you are a news organization, among other things. You have reporters. They produce news. And so the claim he's making is it was very important for you to have a certain kind of life on the platforms that was different because you're an editorial organization, you're an opinion organization.
Well, let me. What I mean by that,
Yeah.
Buzzfeed is in its maybe like first couple years is debatable, but certainly in
Right.
after Ben came on board, definitely an editorial. What I mean by that is that BuzzFeed was founded with like Jonah Peretti's work and stuff that he'd already done at Huffington, a deep knowledge of how stories spread virally through social media. And there was both a knowledge and a tech component to that. And the reason they got tens of millions of dollars to build that organization up is because he and his team understood it at a deep level and could build BuzzFeed into what it is today.
Right.
So when I say TPM is an editorial organization, that's not meant as like we're editorial and you're not. It's that BuzzFeed is an editorial organization and to a significant degree a tech organization. So for those reasons, we just never focused. We had a social media editor. We post things on Facebook and Twitter. We still do.
Right.
But we never had a high dependence on that. We had an audience that, something that is fairly rare in media, digital media today. The great bulk of our audience comes through our front page every day.
Which is not true with BuzzFeed.
No, it's not.
Yeah, certainly in percentage terms, I'm sure it's, yeah. So
that is, you essentially, if I can use the expression, went native very early on.
Yeah, we were born. We didn't go native. We were genuinely born in that ecosystem.
Right, exactly. Whereas, that's why I mentioned you start out as a blogger,
Yeah.
and then you basically build out an online journalism project that basically has to just adapt to everything as it moves through.
right, and I think that there were a series of decisions that I made 10 years ago plus, not to try to have to scale the organization.
Right.
And,
Why?
It became pretty clear to me that doing so, I would have to sell control of the organization to the people who were giving the money, and I pretty quickly got a sense of how that worked, and I didn't want to do that.
Because you have to raise a lot of capital in order to convert over into that kind of enterprise.
Yeah.
Is what you're telling me.
Yeah, and people, give you tens of millions of dollars. They want control of the organization. I mean,
And they want really dramatic revenue growth.
Yeah, they want very dramatic revenue growth, which is, they think, and in large, rightly, dramatic audience growth, and they also want an exit. So,
I see, yes.
and it's funny. I watched this happen with a lot of different organizations, and you would be surprised at how many people go that route and don't actually understand what it involves. That it involves you no longer controlling the organization, and that just doesn't mean you no longer get to make sort of final editorial calls. It means that you can be fired one day, or that the organization can be entirely changed. Right. It almost certainly means the organization will eventually be sold
Right.
to someone else. That's why people are investing all the money, right? Because they want to get a big return. In any case,
I just want to
Yeah.
put I want to keep it going this, but I just want to put a marker on this for the audience. Basically, what you're describing, what both of you are describing, is a particular form of digital capitalism that shapes how it's possible to be involved in the press. That is, you can't be in the press the same way you were in the press in the middle of the 20th century, or even, as we say, in the early 2000s. It's just not the same set of constraints. And I'm interested in the question of how these changes in digital capitalism shape the collection of the news, the distribution of the news, the reception of the news, all the things that people traditionally think are the function of the press in a democratic society. That was my marker, but that's actually the larger question I'm interested in.
to me, the key thing about digital media, about the internet in terms of news, is that there's always been an oversupply of publications relative to the ad dollars that support almost all publications.
Right.
That's basically because the low barriers to entry on the front end, all that kind of stuff. That's why ad rates keep going down, all the different things
Right.
that we
Too
know
many
about.
people chasing too few advertising dollars.
Right. Wow, it's a big topic. I mean, I think about it and I write about it, but I'm not sure you want to get me started on it. This is true, that what Ben has built at Buzzfeed is amazing. It is owned by a lot of different corporate players. Now, I'm not saying that affects the news they're publishing, but it has a big effect on the future trajectory of the company. Do those people want, does Comcast, does Lair Ventures did they want to get out? They want to say, all those kind of things. If you want to operate at that scale, you kind of have to work in that environment. I chose, the sort of investments that Huffington Post got, in 2005, 6, whenever that was. I had those offers. I'm not saying it would have, exploded the way that it did. I had editorial concerns that were the highest priority for me, and so I just made a certain set of choices. In any case, those choices constrained us in a lot of ways. It was one of the reasons, although I'm not sure the dominant reason, that we never got that involved with the platforms. So to a great extent, the precipitous drops of traffic from the platforms has affected us a bit, but I would say less than the vast majority of other publications, because it was just never a big source of
Right.
audience for us.
Right. So to go back to your earlier metaphor, basically a fish swims in the water. It's not like it notices the water is there. The water is just there. You start out as basically embedded in platform economies, right? So you've always had to work with platform economies. And so it's maybe difficult for you to kind of get outside of it and ask, what would it be like if I were a fish swimming out of water? How does it affect news? How does it affect the creation of news, the distribution of news, and these questions?
Yeah, but I think we may less be fish than like aquatic, than like ichthyologists or something. Like
Aquatic what?
Like scientists,
Aquatic scientists.
ichthyologists.
You're an ichthyologist, yes.
We definitely came into that. Like we were sort of born with kind of a theory about the future of media,
And what was your theory?
just that the way people were going to consume news was going to be their friends sharing it with them on social platforms.
Right.
I think that was, and I think it's really interesting that Josh is here
Right.
because a whole generation we were both bloggers, as were you in that moment. There's a whole generation of companies of that vintage that no longer exist because they kind of got halfway into this world of trying to get scale, and neither had the discipline of Josh to not enter that or the resources that we had, I think, basically to kind of get to the other side, and luck. I think these are two different poles.
So I'm going to give you a more
but
pointed
I think the
question.
way it affects news.
Here's the more important question. So the original theory was the way people will get news is they would share it with their friends.
Yeah.
Now here's the pointed question. How'd that turn out for you?
For us, it turned out great. Like I think we found that there are, that the story that not so there are definitely pressures to, and as you see, short-term rewards for creating garbage that pollutes the platforms, for telling people what they want to hear, for telling people Hillary Clinton is really an alien, like whatever, and I think our view, which has been more or less true, is that you're not trying to game the system, you're trying to align with kind of the long-term interest of the platform and the long-term interest of the user of the platform, which is to have good information, to have good high-quality entertainment. If somebody is in the short term beating you by spamming Facebook, like Facebook ultimately has control over that and will probably kill them. And I think the reason we have, we certainly like Josh have seen the dips, the rises and falls in all the platforms we're on, and we're pretty careful about not being too dependent on one of them, but that fundamentally you're providing value in those spaces. That's the long term strategy. And I think among the kinds of content that are really rewarded are huge exposés, giant scoops, incredible writing, really funny, weird stuff, like good journalism basically.
Right. So
among the things, those are not the only
understand.
things.
Now the point that I'm interested in is that this depends, this model in which you can still do good journalism, you can still provide, as you say, value, and it will basically be propagated through the network, through the platforms, depends upon your belief that the platform, which is like the water in which you are swimming, is going to be well taken care of by the platform owner. If the platforms changed how they did their business significantly, it would be harder for you to catch up. It would be harder for you to provide the same quality of product, wouldn't it not?
Well, the platforms have not been particularly. I think people have broadly been surprised by how little the platforms have cared about publishers' business. I mean, I think, and I don't think it's so much the platform decisions.
The point I'm making is the
interest.
opposite.
Okay,
the point I'm
sorry.
making is not the opposite. It's not that they care about your business. It's that you're always competing with everything else that's on the platform. That was what you said to me before.
Yeah.
You said that Facebook has been very good about getting the
Not
policing
very
the garbage.
good. Long term, okay.
Right. And it's because they essentially take care of the garbage. I'm going to use that metaphor. The quality of stuff you want to put out there has a chance, and it can influence people, and it can perform its appropriate journalistic function. So in some sense, you depend upon the platform continuing to police, not well, but at some rate.
Absolutely. And when they make mistakes, like I think like the current, and I think moderation has sort of been superseded by these decisions, these sort of weighting decisions that
Right.
people call the algorithm around what, and they have this current weighting around something they call meaningful social interaction, I think, that kind of rewards loyalty. And you're like, who's like really, really loyal are extremists. And so that's the content that every day you can go look and see what the most shared stuff on Facebook is. So I don't think they always make every decision right. I think that their long term, I think we try to be aligned with their audience, which is our audience, their long-term interest in keeping that audience, in serving that audience quality content, as they compete against Netflix, as they compete against television, as they compete against the person sitting next to you. And so I guess that's more how we see it.
So you are, at least in the short run, and maybe even the medium run, confident that the various platforms that you basically live in are going to do enough useful policing so that you can get the valuable content that you want out to the rest of America. And the world.
Confident is a strong word.
Confidence, the strong. What word would you use instead of confident?
No, I mean, I think in the long term, I mean, I think that, if these platforms fail to do that, ultimately they'll be replaced by other platforms, right? I mean, it's a huge business challenge for them as much as it is for us.
But it also strikes me that since you're not the only player that faces this problem, that is, many of these many news organizations face in different forms the same problem you face. They want to provide news. They want to inform the public. They want to provide what you might call high-quality content because it's important as journalists, but it's also important for democracy. And in some sense, that their ability to do that will depend upon the moderation policies of the large platforms. If the platforms were ever to fall down in their social obligations, social responsibilities, it would make things more difficult for you.
I mean, they've fallen pretty hard. I mean, they're like crawling back up right now, but it's not like, I mean, I think, if you make, and we think a lot about the users of those platforms, what they actually want, what they actually want to share, and that's as important as what are the executives at the platform trying to do.
Right. Do you have a dog in this fight, by the way?
The nice thing about the last couple years is that we don't, to a great degree, I think that sums it up. That we are largely not affected by this stuff, and I think there's all sorts of problems with the different platforms, monopoly problems. The speech issue is actually, somewhat down on my list, but to me, Facebook is a uniquely non-good company.
A uniquely non-good company?
Yeah.
Can you parse that out for us?
I don't think that Facebook is any more monopolistic, powerful in that sense than, say, Google. And there's good arguments that Google has considerably more monopoly power. But I think there are aspects of Facebook's business model, its isolation from the rest of the internet, and its corporate culture that leads it to do a lot of non-good things in ways that are meaningfully different from the other players. Let me give you an example.
So it's going to be different from search, and it's going to be different from YouTube and their uses of algorithms to what to show you.
Yeah.
It's going to be different because of the affordances are different.
There's certain aspects about the people who run Facebook and the corporate culture of Facebook that I think are kind of organic to that entity. I think the major structural thing is this, that Google has all sorts of monopoly power that I think we all basically know about. However, and Google is a huge driver of the advertising crisis that many publications find themselves in.
Can you, by the way, explain that? Most people don't know about this.
Sure. Ad rates are constantly going down for publishers, some publishers more than other, but basically all publishers, all the pressure is downward, and a growing amount of the advertising dollars are being taken up by the platforms themselves. So that
Who broker the ads to the audiences?
Well, yes, this is where a key difference is. But just broadly speaking, let's say that, if you have the total universe of ad dollars that used to go to all publications, maybe, I don't even know what the percentage is now, 30% of that or 40% goes to the platforms, which obviously have costs, but they don't have costs for content because the content is you. right?
Right.
So it's a tough place to be in.
And you.
Yeah, such as it is. Yeah.
And you.
Well, that's the thing. Yeah, it's
Yeah, and I think
it's a good business to be in.
I think that very much us, and I think our argument to them and in general in the long term is that they're very dependent on us, and it's a challenge
is
for them. If you go on
right.
Facebook and you see them saying, you will often see something like, "Hey, you haven't posted a picture. Like, here's something cute you posted 6 years ago about your kids. Like, why haven't you lately?" And often the reason you haven't is because people have stopped sharing. People have mostly stopped or largely stopped sharing personal content on Facebook, and it's been replaced by professional content, by stories by Josh's team or mine, by videos produced by CNN, which are higher quality than your video of your child. Sorry, and are
That's your opinion.
no, well, people are reacting to that by
Yeah.
pushing by
Yeah.
and that is a threat to Facebook because it makes them dependent on us, and they are reacting to that by trying to drag people back on, but it doesn't really seem to be working.
Well, okay. I'm sorry, I didn't get to your last part about not good. But
Yeah, well, let me make one.
And the part where massive revenue follows is to come.
Yeah.
Right. Here's a key difference between Google and Facebook. Google, again, probably the biggest driver of this crisis in publishing and advertising. And advertising is the main funding mechanism of publishing. However, and we have been in business in multiple ways with Google for a dozen years or more. We were one of the beta testers for the original version of their ad serving software. But here's the key: as much as they have damaged us as a place that sells advertising, and not any more than everybody else, we still get a check from Google every month. Because their way of selling ads is all on other sites. Right. There's no Google. I mean, there's a few properties.
They're not serving ads on your site.
No, they are serving ads.
They
on
are
our
serving
site.
ads.
That's my point. That's why we're
Right.
getting money from them. My point is, Google.
That's why I can see turtle wax ads on.
Yeah. Well, it's yeah. Don't even.
That's
don't
following
even get me
you,
started.
not TPM.
Yeah.
Right.
The point is, Google is based on fundamentally on the open web. They make money by expanding their tentacles into other organizations. So they literally cannot exist without all these other parts of the ecosystem. And that puts money back into the ecosystem.
So
Not a lot.
They're taking a cut and then they're pouring the rest of the money back into the ecosystem.
Well,
That's the story you're telling.
They are pouring some money back into the ecosystem. They are also driving down aggregate rates and taking a larger and larger portion for themselves. But there is money going out. The point is, Facebook is in its own little zone. It's a closed unit.
Right.
When Facebook gets ad dollars, it all goes to Facebook. There's some deals on the sides, but
But
fundamentally
they're not serving the ads on other sites. They're serving
correct.
the ads on
Correct.
Facebook.
And here's the point I wanted to make about what Ben said, and I think we've both seen this, that over the last dozen years or so, because of its scale, Facebook has gone into a number of spaces, created whole industries around itself because of its scale, and then for its own reasons just decided they didn't want to do that anymore.
Right.
And you've had whole industries like cease to exist, basically. That is, Google doesn't operate that way. And I think mainly not because they're not jerks, it's because structurally they're not set up that way. And
Well, they're a search company, and search companies by nature want access to every part of the web, and they want everyone else.
They're
to
based
have
on the open
access
web.
Yes,
in any
exactly.
case, I think that is
Whereas
that
Facebook is closer to what used to be called, but is not exactly the old garden model.
correct.
Right.
And I think that is a major driver of its non-good, destructive character as a
But
business.
if it's non-good, and
Yeah.
I want both of your opinion on this, so I'm going to take you in the Wayback Machine to the 20th century. This is a world that never quite existed, but people like to imagine it existed. You had monopoly newspapers in localities that basically had more money than they knew what to do with, and they used that money to subsidize the production of information that was useful for democratic governance. And then, of course, you all know the story in which that world was destroyed, and journalism had to reconfigure itself. It still had to find a way to make money so as to continue to produce information which was necessary for democratic self-governance. And both of you, in different ways, are explaining how you would do that now. In other words, how would you actually fund the production of information necessary for democratic governance? I realize that that's not the only thing that Buzzfeed is about, but it's one of the things that journalism is supposed to do. But this brings me back to a slightly different version of my "how's that working out for you" question, which is, if the spigot is not controlled by you, that is, the spigot of ad revenue is not controlled by you, if it's controlled by the structure of the rates that Google gives back, or if it's controlled by the structure of the content moderation scheme that Facebook decides upon, that is, we really want to emphasize personal experience as the things you get in your news feed, or we want to emphasize news stories as the things you get in your news feed. That's a spigot that can be turned on and off. That does mean that you have to trust these platforms to basically survive as a journalistic enterprise, does it not?
Well, I mean, for us, we've been through many of these ups and downs with them, and I think, the extremely boring answer, which is also true of any major 20th century media company you look at,
21st.
No, 20th.
Oh, 20th, okay.
Is that advertising is at times tough and cyclical business, and strong companies have always tried to diversify their revenue away from it. And so the process that unsexy and fairly boring process that BuzzFeed certainly is in the middle of is working really hard to, hang on to and grow our advertising business, but increasingly find revenue in production, in subscriptions, in a bunch of other things. This is something Josh was early on as well.
The classic way that you made money from the sale of media products was subscription services, one-off sales, advertising. Those were the classic moves, and you're just telling me that you're reproducing it on the digital platform.
Yeah, and there are kinds of particular commerce and video/television that are probably slightly different. But yeah, I think if you look at Viacom or in Disney, what's their business? Actually they have 7 or 8.
Right, and you have a subscription service too now, right? Which you started when?
We started at the end of 2012.
Right, and I take it for reasons having to do with sustainability of your business model.
Yeah, I think we had a sense then that the advertising business was less stable than it seemed, was more volatile and more treacherous than it seemed. So that was the reason we started it.
Right. But I want to move on to the next thing, but the basic idea is that when we talk, this is a thing on content moderation, right? It actually turns out by content moderation we mean a lot of different things. One is getting rid of hate speech, but another thing is basically structuring, the degree to which you get news stories versus other kinds of stories, and therefore the degree to which you make it viable for certain forms of journalism to exist or not to exist. And that actually is an incredibly important part of the relationship between platforms and news. But now let me turn to happier topics. Fake news. So if you were going to advise anyone, whether it's government or you want to advise platform owners about what should they do, if at all anything, about the problem of fake news, what would you tell them?
Let's see. There are a lot of answers, and they're very focused on and very good at finding kind of technical signals, which knock out some of the lowest hanging fruit. But I think they also often, they just believe very, very deeply in technical solutions, and that I think what you're increasingly seeing, obviously, which I think we sort of knew all along, was, you're not gonna the sort of algorithmic solution to detect truth is not close, and people who are lying are really good at making it look like truth. That's the whole point.
Right.
It's their core competence. And so, and the notion that some kind of and they're also, I think it's a really deep Silicon Valley thing, this kind of profound and kind of willful naivete about politics, and this notion that if they're getting aggrieved complaints from Brent Bozell, a conservative activist whose job is to complain about media bias, that those are earnest and true complaints from an aggrieved citizen, and they're certainly not being, and so they get manipulated by, sophisticated and unsophisticated people trying to work the refs in ways that media companies learned to stop being manipulated long ago. So I think the answer to that is you need sophisticated people with real judgment. I mean, the advice I gave, the advice I gave actually did give Facebook a while ago when they were asking about this was, you know what, just like hire Walter Isaacson, have him make decisions on a case-by-case basis. If somebody complains, have them call him and he'll explain it.
Yeah, that'll really scale well, I can see. But what you're saying, I'm going to repeat the point in a slightly different way, is you think that you have to add professionalization on top of technical expertise.
Yeah, and it's expensive, and that's why they don't want to do it.
Right. But
That's the key point.
But it seems to me that your
Scalable.
advice is that they should become professional organizations. Organizations devoted to the culling and collation and curation of public discourse.
They are gradually all getting dragged that way. I mean, ultimately they can really get out of the business and go back to just stop having public content. Go back to, I mean, I think like there are platforms that never really stepped into this public space, and I think Facebook probably regrets that they ever did in some ways.
So examples of such.
Pinterest,
Right.
not totally, but they're just doing their thing. You have pin boards. Snapchat, yeah,
For obvious reasons, because of its affordances, how it's organized.
yeah.
Right. But they chose a particular set of affordances, and that made them.
And it gave them this explosive growth and allowed them to seize huge swaths of territory. But like, there's a lot of stuff in that territory that they now have to govern. Yeah.
Right. So your advice is become more professional, even though that's very expensive and doesn't scale.
It'll scale. It just kills your margins because you got to be professional in 150 languages.
Right. What do you think?
I think that's the key point, and I think there is this thing, and Ben and I have both seen it, that there is this thing in the tech world that algorithms,
Right.
technical fixes, and some of that is just because of the people who make up that world, how they think. But the key thing is, again, the whole model, the whole reason you're in this business is that you get massive profits. The profits keep going up. The costs of administering it only go up a tiny bit because it's all based on algorithms
Right.
and computers. And so it's not just that it doesn't scale well, it doesn't scale at all. Because I think,
Right.
what was it, like a year ago, Facebook said they're going to hire 30,000 basically content moderators. Good luck. I mean, that's a drop in the bucket. If you're actually talking about having real people like follow this stuff,
Mm-hmm.
and it kills the margins, and the margins are how you get the investor money. So
But it would
Yeah.
seem to me that both of you have a vested interest in their becoming more professionalized.
Well, it's largely right now outsourced to us. I mean, journalists in general,
Right.
like BuzzFeed News reporters in particular, Casey out there.
You mean
and-
they ask you, shall we?
No, we report on. They some crisis happens that they are hazily aware of and don't
Right.
totally understand, and we write a story that's that we've looked into it, and this is the bad guy and this is the good guy. Yesterday, one of my reporters exposed literally hundreds of millions of dollars of ad fraud that
Right.
Google. Yeah. So and I think we should obviously get a commission on that, but we do not.
I very much doubt that you will, right? But it's in your economic interest for several reasons. First of all, because they'll depend on you. But second of all, as we were talking about earlier in the conversation, the more that the space is basically clogged up with fake news, the harder it is for you guys to break through, and the harder it is for you basically to get your ad revenue.
Sure, although legitimate publishers aren't one category. We also, we would argue that Facebook should, that shouldn't be overly favoring kind of quote unquote legitimate news that is in fact extremely boring newspaper articles. And the reason that nobody's reading it is because it's boring. They should
Right.
favor our stuff. But there are
You're not saying you're
debates about that.
illegitimate.
No, we're just saying that we are that being legitimate and being kind of native to the platform and the form are two totally separate things
Right.
that often get conflated.
Right. And do the platforms rely on you to do any policing?
I think what Ben is saying, they're relying on BuzzFeed to be a news organization and
Yeah,
find
right.
people
And
doing
cover
things
them,
wrong.
and do
Yeah,
our
cover
job,
them
yeah.
really. It's not
Yeah.
policing, so to speak. He's talking about covering in the same way that we don't talk about politicians say rely on the newspapers to police us and then cover you.
Right.
So we do a little of that. It's
It's a big beat for us.
yeah, it's inherent just because that's the nature of the publication. Yeah, it's where they live.
So it's symbiotic.
I don't know. I mean, it's right. It is our basic job of reporting on the things
Internet
around
world
us.
has always been a
Yeah.
big part of what BuzzFeed does, what it covers.
Right, absolutely. So do you have you have no other advice, by the way, for the denizens of Platformalia?
I think that it's a real, if we are talking about the platforms need to police themselves because they have such a dominant role in organizing the flow of information, that as long as you have 2 or 3 of them, that's a big problem. It's a big problem civically. It's
What
a
if
big
there were
problem.
12 to 15?
A medium problem. It scales both
No,
ways.
no, I was going to ask you, by the way, so Ben, how easy would it be for you to adapt to a world with 15 to 20 major players instead of a small number?
I mean, I think if we look back 3 or 4 years, we certainly felt like there were more, and we thought, and I think a lot of us were, and I mean, this is sort of a good sense of our core competence. We were kind of like, at least sort of preparing for a world where messaging apps were major players and Snapchat was really a
Right.
major. So, I mean, I think the challenge there, that is actually a world that favors the largest players because it just takes a lot of capacity to sort of optimize for all these different places. I mean, there are other interesting players. Many of them are also owned by Facebook. I mean, Instagram in particular. But
Yes.
yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think
Well, so you'll see where I'm going in a second. There are basically 3 or 4 standard arguments people make for what to do about social media. One is basically the European model that we've been talking about, where they just basically they basically use the platforms as their private bureaucracy for policing hate speech and for basically engaging. They piggyback on the fact these things are already doing content moderation, and they just say do some more. Oh, and do it the way we'd like to have the content moderation too. Another model.
I mean, not just the Europeans, also
Yeah.
authoritarian governments.
Yeah, right. But that has enormous overhang in America because it may just not be practical for the platforms to geolocate and have a completely different experience in one country rather than another. So you get overhang in America. The second model is just basically to double down on privacy norms, right? So as to prevent manipulation, but essentially not worry too much about content moderation at all. And the third standard move that people are talking about more and more, it sounds like Trump, people are saying more and more, that many European regulators, I'll be more precise, are worried about more and more, is antitrust. And antitrust is the idea of breaking up and making multiple players, either horizontally, that is to say 15 different ones, or vertically, that is separating out the transit from the ad networks from the content moderation system. So the question I want to ask you is, since journalism only survives if it can adapt to whatever the structures of digital capitalism are going to be, that's why I asked you the question. Can you adapt to a world with multiple players, lots of players? How would you have to adapt?
Let's say, I mean, we're really adaptable and good at it. And I mean, I think you find yourself, I think the place that we have found strength when there are a lot of players is that Facebook is expert in and good at knowing what happens on Facebook, Twitter,
Right.
what happens on Twitter, but they're kind of, they find it hard to understand what's happening off their platforms. And I think what we've tried to do, and this doesn't really answer the question, but I think it sort of does, is, and I think this is, in a way, an argument that they aren't really monopolistic right now, is that, we have scale on Facebook, which we use to promote our show on Netflix. We have scale on Twitter, which we use to promote things that are happening on Facebook. We're able to point between them.
Right.
And that like a media company with scale has to be able to do that.
What do you think? Would you be able to adapt? If antitrust were basically the name of the game for regulators in the next 10 years?
I think we would be able to adapt because, again, we're not really living in that world.
Right.
So there's not that much for us to adapt to. I mean, I guess I see the monopoly issue in my mind isn't so much the individual platforms. It's how those platforms interact with advertising, other businesses. There's lots of stuff in the background of the way these platforms work that are creating almost unimaginable market power in different sectors. One of those market powers that I love because it makes web hosting really cheap is Amazon.
Right.
Like half the web is hosted on Amazon servers. I don't know what the exact. I mean, they have taken over that entire space.
And I
made
take
it-
it Amazon does very little, by the way, of content moderation. They're basically a basic internet services company.
Yeah, this is like
Right.
equivalent of phones. It's
Exactly.
not. This is where you put sites.
Right.
So there's, I mean, maybe on the margins, extreme margins or something, but it's different. I think about again the effect on Google is basically the dominant player in the U.S. advertising market. They, to a significant degree, own the structures that the advertising industry operates on. That and they did that by leveraging their market power in other places. So there's the things that jump out to me more are not these sort of civic speech dominance issues, although those are very important. They're big economic ones that in some of these cases it's not there's not one hot button issue where I'd say like, AWS, which is Amazon's server
Right.
division, they knocked out that lame hosting company down the street that sucked already. So to a great degree, it's like a Robert Bork monopoly, right? It's sort of it's really good and it drove down costs.
Right.
But again, there are these depths of market power in a lot of cases in areas that are not terribly visible publicly that I think are a problem, even if we don't know exactly the sort of the immediate harms they're causing. And again, I think that's just not that visible
Right.
in the public sphere.
This is going to be leading to my question to you. If you had one thing you could do, you could wave your magic wand, that would make it easier for digital journalism to survive in a platform world, what would it be? How would you wave your magic wand?
I mean, I think what Rupert Murdoch wants, and coming out of this world of the television world, is essentially that if Facebook is going to serve our content to people, they should pay us, affiliate fees. I mean, that is the most straightforward, like in the way that Cablevision pays. I think that it's there. You see flickers of it, right? I mean, we in fact do have real substantial revenue from Facebook and Google and Twitter in ways that I think people wouldn't have imagined a couple of years ago. I think you see these platforms, Snapchat too, starting to pay for quality content, and I think in a very competitive world where again people like Netflix are paying billions of dollars, I think it may be hard for places that think they're just going to rely on user content to compete.
Good. Do you have a suggestion?
I think all of the networkification of the advertising industry, which I see no real way that's going to change, but I think all of that automation has been bad for journalism. And in this case, I just mean in the basic sense of the funding structure of
And
most
it's
journalism.
been bad because?
It's been bad because it has driven down advertising rates everywhere, and those platforms have taken up a greater and greater share of the total. So there's just less money to go around. And that's where journalism gets its money.
Right. Like a lot of internet marketplaces, it's made the cost for consumers lower.
But the external there are external effects on democracy.
Yeah.
So it's not just simply that you don't get your widgets,
Oh, yeah.
you don't get your democracy.
You don't get to hire journalists. Yeah.
There you are. Okay, so we're going to take some questions from the audience now. The first question is, did you know you can save 15% on your car? No, that's the wrong question. I'm sorry. Spam, once again. Here's the first question. What do you make of the proposals that would require or encourage social media companies to subsidize journalism by companies like Buzzfeed and TPM? Are there other ways you'd like to see social media companies contribute to the costs of news gathering?
I'm unaware of those proposals, but totally for them. I mean, I guess, our case, I mean, I think that it's that they're not charitable organizations. I think that they have to realize that it's in their kind of like long-term business interests to serve people. And I don't think it's actually controversial that to serve their users quality, and that I think, as in particular you see great publishers like the New York Times move to subscription. What that fundamentally is trying to break the platforms,
Right.
pulling your content off of them.
Right.
And I think that if the economics of these platforms in the long term will only subsidize very, very low quality news, that is what they will get on there.
Right. And what's your answer to these questions?
Remind me of the question?
I will read them again. What do
You
you
want
make
money
of-
from Facebook?
Oh, yeah.
So
Yeah,
what do you think
it
of
seems-
proposals, social media companies subsidize journalism?
It seems totally unrealistic to me that would happen. The same reason I think proposals that government should subsidize, it seems utterly unrealistic to me. And they're private companies. I think the key, to Ben's point, the key with publications going to subscription is a bilateral relationship with a customer.
Mm-hmm.
The issue with advertising, it is a trilateral relationship.
Right.
And it is always a dangerous thing, both in editorial terms and in business terms, when your livelihood is coming from a third player.
Right.
So, it's cutting at the social networks in a number of ways, not just from audience, but again, the social networks dominate the advertising industry.
Right. By the way, I have a question I often like to ask people, which is, in these kind of gatherings, which is, Jeff Bezos bought the Washington Post. Why hasn't Facebook just taken a rounding error and bought the New York Times?
I mean, Facebook or Mark Zuckerberg, right?
Yeah. Why not?
I think there are. That's a great question. I don't think. I can't speak for Facebook executives in particular, but I don't think people in Silicon Valley necessarily believe in independent journalism. I think that's the. Maybe they do, but I don't.
Well,
maybe some do and some don't.
some
but
believe in democracy, others don't.
Yeah, I guess I'm not sure why they would want to in that case.
Yeah, it's interesting. Do you have somebody must have thought of it at some point.
Yeah,
It's not that expensive. Actually, you could just create an independent foundation, and then you just put the assets there, and then it just runs itself.
I think Ben's kind of got a point. I'm not sure it really occurs to people in that world necessarily. Why? Some do.
Okay.
The Salesforce guy just bought
I'm gonna
right?
circle around it then.
That said, it is very cheap. Right, it doesn't take that many of them because it's cheap by their standards.
Yeah, no, it's very cheap in
Newspapers are cheap.
relative terms. Yeah.
But it goes back to the question I was asking before, which is that your lifeblood, your ability to do journalism, which in turn benefits the public and democracy, turns upon the interests of these platforms, and if they don't care about democracy, then they may accidentally crush you underfoot, not even noticing it, by the way that they changed the spigot. And so in other words, that's a really scary answer. You're telling me
that was as true of Procter and Gamble,
Yeah,
though.
right.
Right. It's not like the advertising business was driven by people with a burning passion for democracy. I think it is a weird truth of American journalism
Right.
that it's always been a complicated business. With
Right.
the exception of this kind of very pure subscription that is becoming a larger part of it, where you are just serving your audience.
Absolutely.
Well, and the key thing that you brought up at the very beginning, Jack, that what we see as the sort of the real era of journalism, when everything worked, was overwhelmingly based on geographical monopolies.
Yes, that's
100%.
exactly right.
Overwhelmingly in terms of the workforce of journalism was based on companies that had geographical monopolies, owned commercial speech in metropolitan areas, and as you said, to a great degree, had more money than they knew what to do with.
Indeed. The Kansas City Star, I'm from Kansas City, had a Paris correspondent. That is more money than you know.
Yeah.
Although it's a great job. I'm sure many people would like it. Okay, next question. How do you think the platform's ban of Alex Jones potentially impacts sites like yours or speech generally?
I mean, I think in the short term, like, I mean, I think that, at some point, I'd asked a executive at Google like a year ago, like, you wake up every morning and you decide to be the world's leading distributor of Alex Jones. Like, how do you do that? And I think that at some point that just became untenable for just the most obvious reasons. But they are worried about the slippery slope that it puts them on. I don't think it necessarily affects our business. I mean, in some ways, if there's less garbage, there's more space for real reporting. I mean, I do think that the slope that it goes down that is worrisome is probably not in the U.S. right now, but as it becomes common practice to ban kinds of speech and kinds of purported news that there, you see the Chinese and Russian and Turkish governments describing journalism they don't like in the exact terms that Facebook and Google, and I think ultimately now once you've created those tools, national governments are going to wind up with that power. And you'll start to see it used all over the place.
Yeah, but my point is you don't think that there's any danger that, here I'm going to use the word in scare quotes, legitimate journalistic organizations are going to be squeezed by the moderation systems?
No, I don't think there's any real incentive or interest at the, in Facebook or Google to do that. I think they feel that they're being dragged down this slope. I mean, I think, could you imagine an American federal government doing that? Maybe not right now.
It'd be more likely the European.
For sure. Some different European countries. Yeah, for sure.
Might do it. What do you think about? Is there any does Alex Jones have anything to do at all with you? In other words, first they came for Alex Jones, and you did not speak up because you are not a conspiracy monger.
Basically, I am very wary. I'm really against ceding this idea to the platforms, which the platforms, at least in the past, really wanted to take hold of. Mm-hmm. That I know if you look at how Mark Zuckerberg has talked over the years, that I don't want to cede to them that they are somehow a quasi-governmental entity. Ergo, I don't care, because it's a private company. And if they don't want to have Alex Jones on their network, I think.
But remember Josh Marshall of approximately 15 minutes ago who was going on about the stranglehold over the advertising networks?
No,
what would you say to him?
Well, I'd say hi to myself. I mean, that's what I deal with every day. I guess my point is, I'm not trying to be like willfully naive. I mean,
that's my
they
job.
they are taking on some governmental.
Right.
Dimensions, but I want to resist that, because that to me is the bigger the bigger danger. As a practical matter, do I worry about it? No, I don't worry about it. But I will give you an example that is something that is something I worry about. Google has this program to basically to demonetize hate speech sites. Makes perfect sense. They're in the advertising business. They don't want to be seen as, and maybe they don't want to, be funding, neo-Nazi sites because they're advertising. Blah 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 blah. Right. Okay, so great. I don't have any disagreement with that. A year ago or something like that, we get a form email from Google saying, basically, we have determined that these hate speech articles appear on your site, and please address this, and it had some vague language about your site will no longer be in compliance with Google, blah, 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 blah. Okay. So what the pages were reporting about Dylan Roof, the guy who shot up and killed a dozen people or somewhere around that number in South Carolina. So, the clumsiness of the algorithm, not being able to distinguish between, Dylan Roof's website versus a news article about what he did. But this is an example where those decisions about you're no longer in compliance kind of thing are not going to be made by a person. They're going to be made by these formulas and stuff like that. And if that happened, if we were, kind of knocked out of Google's universe, our company would collapse in a few weeks, just because, not just because of money, but just things that we use and
Right.
blah, 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 blah.
So
And
what did you do in response to
what I did was I got in touch with a really big player in Silicon Valley who I know.
Right.
And I said, you need to give me someone who I can talk to at Google
Oh,
to
you
get
need a
this.
human in the loop, as we often say in the law of autonomous weapons.
Yeah, because I knew how they worked, and they are so big and so automated that I knew it was possible, or at least I feared it was possible, that we could get caught in some loop and be damaged terribly, not because of anything they were trying to do, just because we're this little, flea and they're an elephant and they could just step on us. So that kind of stuff I actually do worry about.
And the thing is, like, Josh is not a flea. We are not a flea. We're very well-connected American journalists who can call people in Silicon Valley.
You're further up in the
I just think,
the
like,
evolution.
I'm a connected flea.
But but I just think, like, if you go particularly outside the U.S. and Europe, this in fact is happening
Oh,
to
yeah.
media organizations,
Yeah.
just constantly getting wiped out because something got a little glitchy at Facebook or Twitter, and it's a story you never hear, and
Right.
like just every day, and small scale YouTubers or just get and they all get kind of good at dodging around those. But it's a crazy feature of the
Well,
landscape now.
the way you avoid it, I mean, this story is a great story, Josh.
Thank you.
This is a great story because it reminds me of everything that I teach about artificial intelligence generally, which is here you have an attempt at enforcement of norms through algorithms.
And benign enforcement, a very
Presumably so.
well-intentioned.
Presumably so. And the problem is, it doesn't actually work by itself. You need humans involved, but humans are costly, right? And then there's always the question of when does the human get involved and where does the human enter into the loop? I take it that if you didn't have the connections, the phone call would not have gotten made.
It is. We have contacts in some parts of Google, but basically, it is impossible to get a person who has authority at Google on the phone, unless you have some real connections or
Well,
you have real
That's not a happy
scale.
story for small journalistic enterprises.
To put it mildly, no. And again, it in that case, I think what we found out that what we were afraid of probably wouldn't have happened, but I know Google enough and how they operate that those kind of things can happen. And again, it's not malicious. It's just you were I can't remember the word that our techs use. You're an outlier. A kind of a non-standard case.
There would seem to be an obvious remedy. The remedy would be that the organizations would have to essentially create a person whose basic job was to deal with journalistic organizations who get in trouble. And then, of course, you have to rely on their discretion. You have to rely on the fact that they know what they're doing and that, that they know how to deal with different kinds of journalistic organizations.
Right. And I think the key there is the person you might talk to is the equivalent of like the help desk, and they say, "Oh yeah, don't worry about it." Well, like, okay, that means nothing to me, right?
But also, they basically do have that in dealing with national American journalistic organizations. But if you are like a small Peruvian blog, good luck.
Okay.
Or if you're just if you don't have big scale.
Yeah.
Right.
Right. Or a small local publisher in the U.S.
But this, of course, has the effect of preferring some kinds of journalism over other kinds of journalism. Our last question is from a small Peruvian blog. No. If you think that these platforms have, quote, monopoly power, unquote, what do you think they have a monopoly on? Human attention? Ad revenues? Data? Something else? That was my best dramatic reading. So they want to ask, what is the monopoly on? What is the lever?
To me, I'm not talking about abstract things about, time in our heads or audience or something like that. I'm talking about structural dominance of particular industries. One is the advertising industry, and if you want to get more specific, it is being the dominant player selling advertising and controlling the network structures that advertising operates on. So you were both racing on the roads, and you police the roads at the same time. data, particularly consumer data,
Right.
the market and consumer data. So again, there's I'm not talking about, you know, monopolizing our souls or something. I'm saying there are multiple industries where I think by any reasonable interpretation, they have strong monopoly power. And in this case, it's mainly Google, frankly,
You mean
although
it's
Facebook
monopoly
too.
over advertising networks? Advertising sales, is that what the monopoly is?
It is monopoly power over the advertising industry, which again, I am defining as being the dominant player in the sales of advertising while also controlling the infrastructure of advertising itself.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I really don't have a profound handle on antitrust law, and I don't really see any argument that Facebook is a monopoly. I mean, they are a monopoly on the closed universe that is Facebook, but but I think it's a criticism of Google and advertising, and search advertising in particular. And then Amazon is the other obvious one, where so much commerce goes through Amazon. Amazon sells a product like the Amazon. If you search for a why am I blanking on all these words today? Not a iPad. I called my phone an Apple phone before. On an iPad on Amazon, you will get served you'll be sold an Amazon Fire. And so, like, again, I don't know if that is formally an antitrust violation, but it's obviously a use of their vast power in online retail to sell their own products.
Well, so I want to go back to what you were saying before, and I'm just, I think there is a connection between accumulating large amounts of data and having power in advertising.
Oh,
Right.
Yeah, that's why they're so great at it.
That's why, right?
So it's not the advertising itself, and you don't even need monopoly power. I assume that the basic idea is that you're taking a group of advertisers, people want to advertise, and you're connecting them up with human beings about whom you know something because you've been collecting data about them for so long, right? And the claim is that your power to do that is greater than the power of anybody else in the market because you have more data and better tools to do that matching, isn't it?
Yeah, and as with
It's
a
not
lot
just
of
the data, though.
I mean, they've also they have built an excellent, a very, very effective advertising service. Like, it's not. I mean, I think that's part of the conversation too. Facebook in particular.
But you said it's not just the data, it's not just the,
Well, ad serving software
yeah.
is again the infrastructure of the advertising industry. Google owns that. They own it at the publisher level. They are plugged into the major national advertising agencies, desks there, how you do programmatic advertising. So it is each of those things. It started with the data. It started with the data and control of search. It was leveraged it was leveraged both on the sales side and again on the ad serving side. And again, there I'm talking about the software that serves advertising at end to end. So it's the three of those things and other stuff that create. I mean, again, it goes beyond most things we even think of as monopoly power.
Right.
If
So
you see it
maybe
up close.
the problem isn't monopoly at all, but some other concern, some other pro-competition concern. It's not just simply that one organization has a monopoly on it, but rather the way in which such power as they have is being used.
Well, it seems it may be things additional to monopoly, but they use their dominance in one area to control prices and in the other, and to drive others out of business.
Right. So that is a monopoly.
Yeah.
Story.
So it's textbook monopoly. It's so deep that it may be other things too, but again, you control prices. You use the ownership of the ad serving software to control prices and drive others out of the space.
Do you have anything else? One last question, because we're almost out of time. Any special challenges now that we're near the midterms in dealing with the flood of all the other things competing with the attention of voters? in providing news?
I mean, I do think it happens to be a moment when in Facebook's tuning of its algorithm, it veered. I'm sure with the best. I don't think what they were trying to do was have, Fox News be the sole source of information on Facebook, but that is where they are right now. So
And you see a problem with that?
So yeah, I think certainly they've built a machine for amplifying the most extreme voices. And I think they're probably trying to row that back right now, but they won't get it done before the midterms. So and it's constantly changing, but it's kind of wild.
Another version of the question: how's that working out for you?
Yeah, it's not the only.
Yeah.
We're less dependent on Facebook than we were, I guess, is the answer to that.
Very good. And do you have anything that you wanted to mention about the problem of covering this midterm election?
I just want to follow up on Ben's point that I think the platforms are at war with themselves in a way that really cannot be resolved, because their fundamental aim is to drive impulsive behavior on their users' part. That is, as you say, almost automatically pushes more extreme voices to the top. There's just no getting around that. That is built into the system, because what each of these things, what the algorithm really is for, is to give you that feeling that you have when you're kind of have a few moments in an elevator and you're, I got to look at the Facebook or look at Instagram or something like that. And extreme views line up with that so tightly that there's really no way of breaking them apart.
This is a great conversation. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Jeff.